Welcome to Qlick Podcast. I'm Josh Kindred, your host, and I'm joined today by Steve Carroll. Steve Carroll is probably one of the most famous dudes in real estate in Australia. He's had an epic journey with realestate.com over the last 10 years, and every single person in the real estate industry knows this guy for a number of different reasons. But we're going to get to know Steve today. We're going to get to know, I suppose, really about him as a person, but some of the places he's been and some of his property journey. So thank you very much for joining us, Steve.
Yeah, great to be here, Josh. Thank you.
And so, Steve, tell us what can we learn about you straight off the bat? You obviously there's a great accent there. You're from the UK.
Yep. Yeah, massive cricket fan.
Okay.
Travel the world watching England play cricket, normally lose. So obviously mixed reactions over the Ashes 2019 and 2-2 against a great team. Feeling pretty happy with that. Although of course we won the World Cup. So massive
little uppercut there.
Massive sports fan. Massive sports fan.
Yeah, fantastic. And so, how long have you been in Australia for?
Yeah, 13 years. So I came over here in 2006. Funny, actually, my first day in Australia was actually Melbourne Cup. So right. I was working for the largest media company in Europe. Got a phone call from News Corp over here in Australia. Would you like to come and work for us? After a bit of to and froing, came over. First day Melbourne Cup, just couldn't believe what I saw. I thought to myself, well, if this is Australia on a Tuesday, what the hell is it like on a Friday? And that was back in 2006. So first 3 years working at News Corp, predominantly in that print space. And then 2010 made the move to realestate.com.au, and that's where I've been for the last 10 years.
Excellent. Did you back a winner that day?
I had no idea what the Melbourne Cup was, to be honest with you. So so the answer is no, because I was just in awe of everything that I was seeing. And
so those crazy Aussies you saw on that day, what's the journey been like? I mean, it's a big shift from UK to Australia life. Has it been a hard journey, a great journey? Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, so very up and down actually. I mean, there's some the journey has certainly had so many highlights, but there have been some moments where my wife and I have looked at each other and thought, do you know what? Let's go back to England. Right. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But the defining moment was back in 2000, and so it would have been 2006, or would it have been 2005, where I was very interested in getting a job in Australia and New Zealand. And don't ask me why. And I was so close to getting a plum job working for the company that I was working for in Europe, but in Australia.
Okay.
And I arrived for an interview down in London. And it was the day that the terrorist attacks happened, and the tube and the bus and so on and so forth. And I actually witnessed the bus exploding literally about 50-60 meters away from me. And that was a massive moment in my life, because obviously the interview that I was supposed to have, that was supposed to get me to Australia to set up a new company in Sydney, never happened for obvious reasons. But it was also the moment that I was introduced to a guy called Derek Redmond. And Derek Redmond was in the 1982 Olympics the favourite to win the 1500s, and pulled a hamstring, and his dad came out of the crowd and helped him over the line. And the reason I mentioned Derek Redmond, Josh, is because Derek Redmond became a friend or a coach after that. And it was he who said, look, if you really want to go to Australia, you got to let go of your company in the UK, because that's a bit of a protection blanket for you.
Right.
In other words,
Yeah.
what he was saying to me is, Steve, you want to go to Australia, you want to start a new life, but you want the protection of your existing company, just so if it doesn't work out, you can go back.
Sure.
Yeah. And so it was he who suggested that I spent time networking with other companies, which resulted in the News Corp connection, which resulted in me coming, which is obviously has shaped the last 13, 14 years.
Steve, you come across as a guy that, you know, is really bold in your approach. I mean, you're a fantastic public speaker. You're highly demanded guy across the country. So to go through that type of transition and actually go through sort of wanting that safety blanket, I suppose it shows that you are human. But, you know, what would be the advice that really allowed you to get through that? Because it's one thing to get some mentoring, but it's another thing to actually go and do that.
Yeah, when I look back on it, so you know, the plan back in 2006 was to get to Australia, give my 3 children under the age of 7 an opportunity to live a different life and see how it plays out. But it was on the condition that I went with my existing company, and it was Derek Redmond who said, no. That you got to think bigger. You've got to be courageous. You've got to let go of. You've got to lose sight of the shore if you really, really want to transform your life and what your family are going to get out of life, and so on and so forth. And that was a massive step. And what was really interesting is when News Corp offered me the role, they asked me to sign on the contract and asked me to resign from my current job so I could start the notice period before I got my visa.
Oh, wow.
Before I got my visa. And I said to News Corp, but what happens if I resign from the largest media company? I had a director's job, a sales director's job. What happens if I resign from that job, accept your job, and the visa doesn't come through? And News Corp said, well, you know, that's just tough luck, but we've never ever had a visa application declined.
Right.
So trust us. And I did. And when I think back to it, I think, bloody hell, that was a massive, risky thing for me to do. The other thing that News Corp insisted was if it didn't work out in the first 12 months, then I'd have to pay back all the relocation fees and other expenses. So again, when I think back to the walking into my boss's office in London, handing my resignation, and I'd been at that company for 13, 14, 15 years, yeah? And secondly, signing on to a company in Australia, knowing that I needed the visa that was yet to be accepted, that was a pretty risky thing to do. However, as you said 5 minutes ago, I'm pretty confident in my own ability. I'm always up for a go, and I'm glad I did it.
So very, very courageous, and obviously your wife had to be the same to actually back you as well with 3 young kids.
Yeah, we did, and we didn't have the support of all the family. So my wife's family didn't talk to us for a long time.
Okay.
Because they saw it as losing their daughter, losing the grandchildren.
Right.
My parents were more supportive because they've done a lot of travel, but certainly when we jumped on that plane, there was no massive farewell from the family. And
How did the kids handle it?
Oh, brilliantly.
How old were they?
So Ollie was 7, he was my eldest, Annie was 5, and Tom was 3.
Okay.
And so they were all going to school in the UK. So obviously they had to let go of friendships. They had to move into a new school here in Brisbane at Chapel Hill, make new friends, and it was a massive thing for them. But I think it really helped build their what's the word I'm looking for? It helped them build their strength and
resilience.
Resilience was the word. It helped them build their resilience. And you know, we were living in a part of the UK which wasn't particularly cosmopolitan, so everybody everybody had sort of been born and bred and come from a family that had come from the area, if that makes sense. Very, very white community. And then when the kiddies went to the school in Chapel Hill, you know, there were Indians, Sri Lankans, South Africans, New Zealanders, Australians, Brits, and so on and so forth. So I think it really built their awareness that this world is a big, big place.
How important is that for the youth of today? I mean, how has that shaped the way that your kids have developed and into the people they are today?
Yeah, massively. So I think for me, travel is such a great education, and you know, it's tough because, you know, my eldest Ollie now, he's at ANU in Canberra, and my daughter, she wants to go to London. She wants to go to the UK next year for 6 months or 7 months to work before she starts university to study as a teacher, and of course, I don't want to let them go because for me they're still my babies, but you know, they're not babies. You know, Annie's 18 and Ollie's 20, but I certainly won't step in their way because I know that travel is a massive education. And the one thing, you know, I mean, we're good friends. We've kind of made up with my in-laws now, who are more supportive than they were for 2 or 3 years. But certainly, I learned from that it's so important when your children make a decision, whether or not you agree or disagree, if it's going to enhance their education, enhance their life, you've got to support them and you've got to give them the big thumbs up, and you've got to let them go.
You come from a role where every day is digital. You're on social media, you're online. It's that's everything that you're doing, and obviously that has a big part in the younger generation today. Do you think travel and that exposure bridges some of the pain points that the young experience because of the digital and online exposure? Yeah,
so I think you know when I'm talking to my children, I mean, obviously as a parent, you're trying to give them as best advice as you can. I mean, one piece of advice I give my children and anybody who wants to listen is travel. And you know, a lot of younger people who work at REA, if they talk to me and say, look, I'm thinking about, you know, jacking it in and going to the UK to work, I say go for it, because you'll just enhance your life, you'll network, you just won't look back. The other bit of advice I give my children, and again younger people at REA, is just be really careful what you put on social media, because that digital footprint is so important. So what we know is employers, when they're thinking about employing a certain individual, it's not uncommon now to check out their social footprint to get a view as to whether or not is this person going to fit into my company or not. And so you've got to be very, very careful with what you post, the language you use, and so on and so forth, because it could come back and haunt you. So travel, social footprint are two incredibly important things.
Yeah, okay. So let's change it up a little bit. You moved over from the UK, and it sounds like you moved to, was Chapel Hill the first place that you...
Yeah, so Chapel Hill, so this was before Google Maps. Yep. So we literally landed, and I literally at the... So there was many conditions with News Corp coming to work for them. I've told you about a few of them already, but the other condition was they wanted me to come out 3 months before the rest of the family,
okay, because
they didn't want me to have the distraction of the family. So I actually lived for 3 months by myself, and Monday to Friday I was at work, and Saturday and Sunday I'd literally get in the car with an old Refidex and just get lost, yep, and try and come up with a suburb that I knew the family would like. Realestate.com.au was about, so I was able to obviously speak to my wife in the UK and say, check out this house, and right, I mean, it wasn't as sophisticated as it is right now, but we ended up in Chapel Hill, and when I flew back after 3 months, picked the family up, and then we flew back again, and literally the taxi pulled up at the house that I'd rented, and I said, well, this is it. And we rented for 3 years, okay, and had a ball.
Okay, great. And so, I mean, you've been a huge part of shaping the sophisticated nature of realestate.com for the consumer today. What was it like for you then when you did go on to purchase? Was it something that was straightforward for you, or was it still a bit of a journey hunting around?
Yeah, so what was really interesting is how poorly I was treated as a tenant. Yeah,
Right.
for 3 years. It was like, because we owned a house in the UK, and we actually only sold that house a couple of months ago. So we were renting Australia, but we owned a house in the UK, the family home. And I'd got certainly not wealthy, but I'd got a good job, and I got a bit of wealth behind me, so I was at some point going to buy. And the number of real estate agents who just missed that opportunity to build a relationship with me over those 3 years, in particular the company that rented the property to me, I thought to myself, this is poor. Then we moved. My first job at REA was down in Melbourne. So we moved to Melbourne. We rented in Melbourne for a year. Similar experience from the real estate companies that were renting the property to me. And then after 12 months of renting, REA moved me back to Brisbane. And that's when we got serious about buying a house. And we bought a house over at Anstead on acreage. And that's where we've been since.
Okay, great. And what made you choose acreage?
Well, we kind of came from a very sleepy village in the UK,
Okay.
and lanes and fields and sheep and I mean, obviously Chapel Hill is quite suburban, so we moved to Chapel Hill just for, I suppose, safety. I suppose,
Yeah.
It was
Close to everything.
It was close to everything, but that wasn't us. And so obviously, as we got to understand the way of living in Australia a lot more, we wanted to move back to a lifestyle that we'd kind of grown up with in the UK, and that was with space. And so we moved to Anstead, and we haven't looked back.
So really, buying a property for you was more about, I suppose, a family move for you to be able to have all the things that you'd looked for and had in the past, but also have that, I suppose, the space. It wasn't necessarily just an investment or a financial decision.
No, it definitely wasn't an investment. It was, and to be honest with you, my emphasis on life has investment and making money has always been secondary to experiences.
Right.
Always. So every single year, if I get a bonus, I'm going to spend it on an amazing holiday with the kids. Yeah.
Right.
And colleagues of mine will go, well, why don't you buy an investment property? And I'll go, well, yeah, I could do, but going away with the children for 2 or 3 weeks, those experiences I'll remember forever. And I'm not sure if I've got the balance right. Maybe I should have invested a little bit more and had a few less experiences. But we bought there not because it was an investment, but we just saw that it was a great place that we could have family life and so on and so forth. And so far, it's all come true.
Do you see yourself continuing to live in Anstead on acreage? Of all the places you could choose to live, with all the travel you've done,
Yep.
Where's the place that, if Steve decides he's going to kick back and retire, relax on the farm, is that what it looks like? Or
Yeah, so I think the dream would be if I'd have invested better and spent a little less on holidays, maybe this dream would have come true. But I think the dream would be to have a very small 300-year-old cottage next to a pub in England that I could live in for 3 months a year. And then the rest of the year live on acreage over in Brisbane. I think that would be the perfect combination. I mean, the sea is awesome, mountains are awesome, but obviously you can't have everything. So that would probably be the ultimate dream.
of all the places you've been, what's your favourite place?
Whatever.
Ever?
India.
India?
Yeah.
Wow. Tell us why.
Well, funny, actually, just digressing that question. So I spoke at a conference last week, and the speaker after me was, and I hopefully I'll get his name right, but Sahu, who was the little Indian lad who got lost, and that that became that blockbuster movie Lion.
Yes.
And he actually spoke after me last week, and just listening to him speak and listening to his journey across India and the trains and what have you just brought memories back to me on how awesome India is as a country. So it's the hardest country to travel in, because you're white, and there are lots and lots and lots of people who find the fact that you're white very, very interesting. So you're constantly being bombarded by people who are trying to sell you stuff. But the smell, the food, the history, the culture just blows your mind. And I remember when I've been to India 4 or 5 times now. Most of the times I've been to India was when I was younger and just traveling around the world in between jobs. And I remember someone once saying to me, India is that country that you desperately want to leave, but as soon as you leave, you desperately want to go back.
Wow.
And so incredible country, India.
Yeah, excellent. And so you've been all around the world. You've worked very closely with the real estate industry. You've just talked on some of your personal property journey. What is property and real estate, given that you've got such a close connection to it, what does it look like in 5 years' time?
Property and real estate in 5 years' time. Well, the first thing I would say is the thing that
I'm going to preface this a little bit with 10 years ago, we don't recognise the change today, but 10 years ago you had your Refidex out. Today we're out with the Google Maps and we look at realestate.com. 10 years ago, 13 years ago, the consumer didn't know everything that the real estate industry knows. And typically today, the buyers and sellers, everybody has access to that information. It's changed so much in 10 years. But then because we're on the journey, it doesn't feel like it has changed that much. It's sort of slowly changed. I mean, we probably forget that it was, just almost 10 years ago that Facebook was just starting. Now it's a way of life. So in 5 years' time, does it dramatically change or is it still going to be slowly? But and what does that look like for the consumer?
So I think the change that we've seen is only the beginning. I reckon the change we're going to see in the next 5 years is going to be absolutely massive. And on one of there's a few reasons for that. Number one is technology. Yeah. So I often say to audiences that technology is working at about 40% of its capability right now. So 2019, technology is at 40% of its potential. So imagine what technology will do to our lives when it's at 80%. So here we are in 2019 and technology is already having such an influence on our lives. Yeah? Imagine when it goes up 2 or 3 more gears, which it will do. Yeah, which it will do for lots of reasons. I think the other reason why it'll be so different over the next 3 to 5 years is the emergence of the millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z into the property market. So by 2020, half the workforce will be millennials. So half the workforce in 2020 will be under the age of 34. Yeah. And that means that the demographics of people buying and renting property is going to shift because obviously the older people, the baby boomers and the Gen X will start to die away literally, and this younger generation who have grown up with technology and have different expectations are going to have huge expectations from the experience of buying and selling property. I don't think they will find it unusual or odd for a platform like Facebook or Instagram to say, we know that you're interested in, for example, living on acreage with a 60-minute drive to the beach. Yeah, we'd like to introduce you to people that have got properties that tick that box. Are you okay with that?
Wow.
Yeah. So. Let's be blunt, right? We've given all our information about us. We just tick the box, whatever terms and conditions. These companies know so much about us that you have to believe that platforms like Facebook will introduce a person to a person. And consumers will not find that abnormal. Now, if I mention that to anybody over the age of 50, they'll go, well, that's a That's my privacy that they're interfering with. It's not right, and so on and so forth. You talk about that scenario to an 18 or 19-year-old, I go, yeah, that's fine. That's no problem.
Become
with
an
that.
expectation.
It's just an expectation, yeah. And and I talk to my children. I talk to my children about newspapers, and they're completely confused as to why anybody would ever read a newspaper. Now, don't get me wrong, because I'm a big fan of newspapers, and my father was an editor of a big newspaper in the UK. So I've got a real soft spot for newspapers. But my kiddies would no more read a newspaper than fly to the moon. Now, my 20-year-old son, who's at ANU in Canberra, when I talk to him about how realestate.com.au or domain work, where you have to go through listings and listings with your thumb, he said, well, I don't want to do that. I want technology to tell me what properties I should be looking at. Yeah?
Yeah, right.
And so that's the change in expectations.
And I suppose with that, with technology, we start to replace some of the redundant or, I suppose, yucky touch points, the letdowns in service that's transpired throughout the real estate industry for such a long time. Where does a real estate agent have a place in 5 years' time? If you've got places like Facebook connecting a buyer and a seller and actually knowing the expectations of those two people?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it may not be Facebook. It may be a company that actually doesn't even exist here in 2019. So we probably shouldn't get carried away with Facebook, but we use Facebook as an example.
They could be gone just as quick as the next.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are two things that real estate agents have got that can never be replaced by technology, AI, robots, and so on and so forth. One is the human factor. Yeah, the ability to be interested in somebody, the ability to show empathy, the ability to show sympathy, the ability to be creative, to think out of the square. Yeah, we call it the human factor. It's in our DNA. Now, some real estate...
You're talking about things that the most people don't consider a real estate agent. When I think of a real estate agent, I don't think of empathy and sympathy and, those really
listening skills. But I encourage real estate agents to exercise that muscle, because that muscle, the soft skills, will be very relevant as we move into the next decade, because I can't see that being replaced by technology. Right. Yeah. And so, I tell this story which really sums up what I've just said. So I'm on a bike ride in Queenstown in New Zealand. I'm speaking at a conference. I bump into, it's a Monday, there's nobody around. I've been cycling for a couple of hours, and I bump into a fellow cyclist who happens to be a doctor from Birmingham in England. Right. And we start talking about technology. Now, this doctor tells me that doctors will be replaced by AI and technology in the near future. He's worried about his job. And I'm saying to him, well, how can that be? You went to university for 6 years, for goodness sake. Yeah. And he said, well, look, as a doctor, what happens, Josh, is, Steve, is you come in and you say, look, I'm feeling off colour, just don't feel myself, I don't feel right. He said, as a doctor, I do some examinations and I get data from those examinations, and I compare that data with other data, and I just say, hey, look, this is what's wrong with you. Here's the prescription, go off and get the medicine. Yeah. Right. Well, this doctor was saying to me in Queenstown, this is earlier this year, he said technology and AI will be able to do that better, more efficient, faster, and so on and so forth. Because what I'm doing as a doctor is I'm analysing and I'm just working with data. Right. Now, what was really interesting, what he said to me was, my wife, on the other hand, does a job in the hospital that will never, ever get replaced. And his wife was a nurse. And when you think about it, what nurses are brilliant at are those soft skills.
Of course.
Yeah. And he said, I can never see AI or technology replacing those soft skills, because when you're sick and you're in hospital, you can't beat the soft skills that a nurse brings to a party that a doctor generally doesn't. Yeah. So when you think about that in the context of real estate, if a real estate agent really focuses less on giving data and reading data, because at the end of the day, most consumers can do that themselves, but focus on the soft skills that we've talked about, that I think is really, really important. So I think that soft skills will continue to be a big part of the real estate makeup as we move into the next decade. The other skill is the ability to negotiate, because I can't for the life of me think that even if a platform like Facebook was to introduce you and I, Josh, so you've got a house that I want to buy, and through their algorithm they can introduce the two of us, I know for one, we would not be able to agree on a price, yeah? And therefore, a human being, i.e. a real estate agent, is going to be the person who's going to broker that deal,
right.
yeah? So I think that real estate agents will definitely exist as we move into the next decade. I just think it will be completely different to what it looks like here in 2019.
How will we consume our property experience? You know, are we going to keep walking through open homes at a set time? What does it look like in 5 years' time to actually experience property?
Yeah, so I again, if you think about the soft skills, the ability to walk into a kitchen, to touch, to feel, I can't see open homes stopping. I think open homes will continue. What I think will happen is you'll probably go to less open homes, because technology will enable you to actually reduce the places that you look at.
Sure.
Because you'll be able to go inside homes through technology like augmented reality, and so you'll probably not do 7 open inspections.
You live in the tech world. Talk to me. What does augmented reality look like for me to go and look at a property?
Well, I mean,
what's that really look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's virtual reality and there's augmented reality. But I mean, look, without getting too complicated, I think that we will be moving into a world where it will be very easy for a potential buyer to do a tour of a house before they've actually walked into it. Now it's a bit clunky now here in 2019, but remember what I said, technology is only working at 40% of its potential.
Yeah.
So imagine in 3 or 4 years time where on a Wednesday or Thursday you're sitting down with your wife or your partner and you're thinking, right, well, there's 10 homes that we could potentially look at on Saturday. Let's whittle that down to 4. And you'd whittle that down to 4 using technology like virtual reality, augmented reality,
sure.
yeah, which really for the audience is the ability to go in, have a look round, and it not being clunky. And I also think the ability to actually go into a property and say to your wife or your partner, well, look, I wonder what would happen if we knocked that wall out and instead of having 2 bedrooms, had 1 master bedroom,
right.
And the ability to physically do that on the internet before you've gone into a house.
Actually see that. Well, you can't even do that in real life.
No, you can't. Yeah. So you actually can say, well, we'd want to take that wall out. We'd probably want to make the kitchen, instead of it being that ghastly brown color, what if we made it a bright blue? And again, using technology, you're able to visually achieve that. So when you actually go to the open home, you're already kind of
seeing that next step.
Exactly. And I think that's the way it's going to move over the next 3, 4, 5 years without question.
Well, Steve, you're such a sought-after guy in a digital space, but also across many industries. How do you have the time to do something like Hands Across the Water? And tell us about Hands Across the Water. So Hands Across the Water is a charity that was set up by a friend of mine after the tsunami of 2004. I'm pretty sure it was 2004. It was at the beginning of the century anyway. Yeah. And if you remember, hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Thailand, Sri Lanka, India. And a guy called Peter Baines, who I know him and his wife very well. He was he was part of the Australian police force that went over. His job was to identify bodies. And if you talk to Peter, he talks about 2 things. He talks about the number of kids that he put into those bags and zipped them up. And he talked about the number of kids who were left without parents, without homes.
And so very soon after returning to Australia, he decided to quit the police force and go back to Thailand and try and build homes for these orphan kids. And that charity, Hands Across the Water, has got bigger and bigger and bigger. But the needs of the children are different now. So one of the things that I'm trying to do for these kids is give them the ability to learn about technology, because, Josh, Hands Across the Water have got enough funds and enough supporters to put a roof over the heads of these kiddies, and feed them and so on and so forth. But what they haven't got is enough funds to educate them. So a lot of these 14, 15 and 16-year-old kids who are in these homes or orphanages. Now, they're not in the homes because of the tsunami, because obviously that was what, 15, 16 years ago. Many of the kids are in the home because they come from abused parents, or their parents can't afford to keep them, or they've got an illness and the parents just want to get rid of them. And so what happens with these children now is they go into the workplace at 15 or 16, and of course they're not computer literate, so they end up getting a really poor job. Right. A lot of the girls go into prostitution. And so what we're trying to do with the Digital Live bike ride and the Digital Live education program is trying to raise money for Hands Across the Water to invest in the education of these children, to give them a good chance of getting a good job. The question was, how do I find time? Difficult. Spend a lot of time in the evenings and at the weekends. But the great thing is the real estate industry is full of amazing, kind people. And it's really interesting because the real estate industry to many doesn't have a great reputation, but when you work in the industry you realize that there are so many kind-hearted, great people, and so finding time becomes easier when you've got people who will actually help you achieve what you want to try and achieve. And I'm building an army of people who give their own time to help achieve the goals that I've set to help Peter Baines create what he wants to achieve over in Thailand. And obviously Kindred have been a really, really big supporter of the bike ride. I think there's at least one, if not two of you, cycling over 500 Ks next year, and we're going to raise $1 million next year towards this education goal. Wow. It's incredible.
Wow to the $1 million, but wow to 5 days. What's that like? I mean, it's obviously got to be hard and taxing, yeah?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've done...
How many kilometres do you do?
Yeah, so it's 535 Ks. We cycle for 2 days, we have a rest day, and then we cycle for 3 days. So you're kind of in Lycra 6 days, if that makes sense. Most of the people who ride aren't cyclists. Most of them are just normal people carrying a few extra Ks who just want to actually improve their fitness and do something extraordinary, yeah? So the one thing that we insist on this bike ride is we have zero ego, we have zero competitiveness, we all leave and we all arrive together, yeah?
Beautiful.
Now, clearly, when you're doing 120 kilometres in a day, you're always going to have people who are a bit fitter than others, and we allow that to happen. But we stop after every 20 kilometres, we regroup, we have a little bit of a team talk, high five, then we move on again. And that's what we're trying to build out.
It is an extraordinary experience, and you are building an army, which is fantastic. But what are some of the keys to that leadership that and to your leadership success with Hands Across the Water, but also your other roles in business?
Yeah. So what I've learned from Hands Across the Water is you've just got to stay front of mind, and you just got to keep asking. So when I created the bike ride, which was the first bike ride we did was earlier this year, we had 30 riders, and believe me, every sign up that I got, and I got all 30, I probably had 1,000 rejections. So my success ratio was I speak to 1,000 people, I get one sign up, yeah? And what I've learned from that is you just got to keep going, just understand that rejection is just part of life, right? And you just got to persevere. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is those 30 riders had such an amazing experience, and when they started posting about their experience on social media, suddenly I had people phoning me asking if they could ride. So the shift happened, and we've got 100 riders next year in 2020. So we've gone from 30 to 100. But the interesting thing is, Josh, getting 100 was actually 100 times easier than getting the 30.
Right.
Make sense?
Momentum.
So when the 100 ride in February and March, I reckon getting 250 riders for 2021 will be easier than getting 100.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a massive, massive business lesson in there. You know, if you're a businessman, a real estate agent, or it doesn't matter what you're selling, and you're starting from nothing, you gotta understand that those first few deals are going to be the hardest, but it does actually get easier.
Yeah,
so
of course.
that I think is really, really important.
Steve, let's wrap up. Thank you so much. I'd love for anybody that's interested in doing Hands Across the Water to support it. But also, can you just tell me, just before you go, where do you find the energy? I mean, you work so hard. Tell me about how you find that energy.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. I mean, a lot of people, when they describe me, talk about passion and energy. I think it's just sort of built inside me. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I have down days and days where I think, oh God, you know, is this really what it's all about? But I try. What I try and do, Josh, is I try and hang around with people like you who are positive, you're a thought leader, because one of the things I've learned in life is if you hang around with negative people, if you hang around with victims of life, you just become one of those. If you hang around with people that are entrepreneurial, they want to make a difference, like you, like Peter Baines, like Peter's wife, Claire, then it's infectious. And you can do some great things.
You're a star. Thank you so much, Steve. We love your work and all the best in the future. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Josh.